Well, hello there, YouTube, and welcome to another live oil painting, portrait painting tutorial. So today we are going to talk about color relationships in portraiture, and in particular, the past couple streams where we were developing this one, we focused more in structure. So clearly, when we painted last time, we got more into the details. I introduced the idea of what sinking in is and how does it affect the painting. So if you want a recap on that, I can explain that during this stream. Notice that this has sunken in. So those of you that were watching last time or the time before that, now you know how to identify areas of the painting that have sunken in. But again, that's not a big deal because today we are going to be creating some balance between these colors. So hey Tipu, welcome. Alright, so let's go to the palette, which is somewhat crooked. Let me fix that for you. And let's go ahead and mix something for the background. And in the photo reference, it's kind of like a bright purple, kind of a light purplish color. Whoops. So I'm going to go ahead and mix something up for that, and it can get a little bit messy when you're working with a lot of colors. So the best thing to do is have a little bit of extra paper towels hanging around. So I'm going to put another one over here. I like to use Viva brand paper towels. No, I'm not sponsored by them. I just really like their paper towels. So we're going to use Dioxazine purple, lead white. I'm using a size 4 filbert extra long bristle brush by Silber Brush brand. Links are in the description box for you. Hey Stephanie Thompson, hi Canvas Dancer. And I'm going to make this purple a little bit towards the red. Purple can go towards the blue or it can go towards the red. I'm going to lean towards the red. And let's go ahead and try this out. Hey Leonie. Okay, so when I say balancing color relationships, by color relationship you have to relate colors to one another. So just already putting a spot of color there kind of gives me an idea of what this color is like compared to the surrounding color. So moving it near that edge gives me a little window to see here between the skin tone, the hair, and the background color. So you can relate different shapes that are similar enough to one another, such as the planes of the face to one another, some of the darks of the hair to one another. In this instance, I'm looking at the comparison between these three little sections here. And so I find that that doesn't bother me. So I think I was fortunate enough to get the color that I want right away. It is brighter than what's in the photo reference. And usually background colors in portrait paintings are kind of either brown or gray, or some variation of brown and gray. And that's perfectly fine, but it's kind of boring if you look at a bunch of paintings that all have brown and gray backgrounds. So having something that's a little higher key, meaning a brighter color, actually is not done that much. So it's a nice thing to do. Probably made the shoulder a little too low. So when we get into some of the clothing, we're going to adjust that. This is a very smooth surface, so I can pretty much just scratch the color into there. Hey Mimi, hi Angela. Now if this were a thicker surface. So let me zoom you out so you can actually see the top. If this were not thicker, a rougher surface, this would be really annoying to have to kind of scratch this background color in. And obviously I could use more paint and add some medium to it and a bigger brush, and I would cover a bigger space much faster, but I don't feel like it. And yes, there is a cast shadow here, but I don't feel like it. I don't think for this painting I really need to put cast shadow in there. Not really necessary. We're going to leave a little square. Sometimes in portrait sketches you see little squares like this. I feel like Sargent started that trend, and we're just going to keep with that little trend. So what I'm going to do is get my fan brush, if I can find it. I always lose that thing. And I'm going to make sure that there's no glare. A Designs by CAD Pro, thank you. Alright, so we're going to move to the next area to relate colors to one another. And that's going to actually involve some skin tones. So let's return to the palette, and we're going to paint the neck region in there. So I'm going to want a shadow color first. So as you recall, some of you might remember exactly what colors I used for the shadow. I don't. I believe it was burnt sienna. Let's see, burnt sienna, Viridian, probably some Indian yellow. And remember, I kind of just mix by feel. Kind of dull it down a little bit with Dioxazine purple. And since last time we used spike lavender, we can continue to use it. Spike lavender mixed with cold pressed linseed oil. I'm using that to thin out the paint slightly. And we're going to leave the areas that are sunken in alone. We're not going to mess with them. Designs by CAD Pro. Who is Sargent? Yep, as Leone wrote, John Singer Sargent. One of the most famous portrait painters of all time. He's up there with Rembrandt and Velázquez and all those names. So this little wedge in there is for the neck muscle, this tube-looking muscle called sternocleidomastoid. And I'm going to mix up dark skin tone for the dark light. We're switching brushes for that. So I'm going with burnt sienna, white, and cerulean blue. The value is almost the same as the palette. So I can relate this now to the shadow color. It's still kind of in the greenish family. It's obviously lighter in value, and it goes, let's say, a little more towards the pinks. Now remember, what you see on the palette is not going to be the same as what you see up here, because this is not a wooden color, this is gray. So if you want a closer analogy, then you should have a gray palette if you want to, but I like using wooden palettes. Thanks for watching from Egypt. Etipu, no, I did not go to medical school. Knowing some anatomical information is important. for portraiture and figure painting in general. But it's only important to help you place the parts, know what the parts are. But that's it. It's not going to make you paint them better just because you know what they are. But no, I didn't go to medical school. Let's see what this value will look like a little closer. And that's exactly the kind of grayish color that I want. A grayish skin tone. Now before long, I'm going to go back and correct the shoulder before I forget. So I'm just going to leave myself a little note. And why not, of all things, use Phthalo Turquoise. Because we can. And just correct the shoulder. Now her arm is lower, I believe. Her shoulder, this shoulder is lower. But the cast shadow makes it look different. So remember, I'm not really putting the cast shadow in there. We're working our way towards a vignette in this painting. A vignette is kind of an abstraction. It's almost like abstract art. It's the areas that you leave unfinished in a painting to complement the areas that are more finished. Going back to the palette, let me move that for you so you can see what's going on. Let's see here. I'm going to revisit the darks, make them a little more orange. So now I want a plane similar to this one. Similar value, but a little more orange, and this is going to fit underneath of the neck. See, when the paints, I actually messed up and I forgot to put the palette in the box last night because I tend to be kind of forgetful. So if it dries on the outer layer, someone asked about the clumps of paint. And why do I have a lot of clumps of paint on my palette, and what does that help me with? Number one is if you're lazy like me and you don't want to take all of the paints off of your palette all the time, you can keep them on there in large clumps and they dry more slowly if you have them in large clumps. And with this, I can dig into it. So when the oil paint dries, it dries on the outer layer. So it turns into kind of like a crust on the outer layer, and you can dig into it and you've got fresh paint. What I do is I put it in a stay wet palette box, which is an airtight box that prevents the paint from drying too quickly. Not completely, but somewhat prevents it from drying. So question, let's see, why so many colors on the palette, not just a few colors? So using a limited palette is pretty popular. It's a very almost antique kind of way of painting. It is safer for beginners in particular to work with a limited palette like the Zorn palette. So for example, for my students, I have them start off in the Zorn palette. However, when you progress further into painting from life, not just doing studies from old master paintings, which is a very important thing to do, and I have my students do that all the time, but when you paint from life, there are so many colors in nature, especially with human skin and in portraits. And the more we explore these colors, the more lifelike our paintings will become. For example, if you're only painting from photo references, you are limited to what kind of colors you can observe from nature. And I understand that it is difficult to work from life because of the fact that you need to travel and go to different artist groups and things like that. So yes, there's a lot of challenges in that, but having this extensive number of colors allows you to have the complete control over the color wheel. You can mix anything that you want with this. You're not restricted to only doing portraits. You're not restricted to only doing landscapes or still life. And it's a lot of fun to have. Also, I'm going to give you something to look up as well. Look up Henry Hinchey. I'm going to type his name on the chat. So everyone that's curious about why I have so many colors and where does that come from, I'm going to type his name. Hopefully I can spell it right. Look up Henry Hinchey, and he was an American Impressionist painter back in the day. He died only recently, I think in the 90s or maybe in the 80s. He taught Nelson Shanks, who is my superhero, I call him. He taught many other artists in the Cape Cod School of Art. Henry Hinchey was taught by, I always forget the order of things, but he was taught by, I believe, Charles Hawthorne, or maybe a student of Charles Hawthorne. And Charles Hawthorne was taught by, either directly or indirectly, by William Merritt Chase. I think I may be getting the timeline wrong, but anyway, Henry Hinchey, there's a lineage there that goes all the way back to the Impressionists. William Merritt Chase was an exceptional teacher and a world-renowned color painter, impressionist. Impressionism is not just painting loosely. So a lot of people use the word impressionism very loosely. Impressionism means painting color, trying to paint with color as opposed to only value. And this was not just started by Monet, although Monet tends to take most of the credit for it. It goes as far back as the Pre-Raphaelites, and even before them. Painters have always been trying to express the beauty and magnificence of nature, and the only way to really express that is with color, because everything is color. Not to say that there's no room for value. I love values. Values do all of the work when it comes to structure. Well, at least most of it. And of course it was a typo. Of course there's a typo. If you ever wonder why my setup shakes, that's because my laptop is right underneath of it. So when I'm typing, the setup will shake. Anytime I'm switching from camera scenes, the setup will shake. And the setup of colors on here in this kind of color wheel fashion is directly inspired from Nelson Shanks. Henry Hinchey did have his palette set up like a color wheel, but his is a little different with earth colors on a different part of the palette, and it's just a different layout, but it's the same concept. Alright, so for instance, the neck actually is different than the face. The sum average of the colors on the neck is going to be different than that of the face. Not so much on the photograph. I painted this model and this setup from life in the past. And if you go on my Instagram, you can actually see the painting that I did of her. There's an environment in there. There's a boa constrictor. There's statues, flowers, There's a cabinet, there's a tarantula in there, an easel. There's a lot of things in that painting. One thing I noticed when I was painting her from life is that her neck region is a little bit more pale, I guess closer to the blue, whereas on the photo reference it looks almost the same. So let's go back to the palette. And this has been kind of like a, I don't know, like a theme that's been reoccurring in my YouTube channel ever since I started it, which is painting from photo references is only, I guess, a last resort. Painting from life really is what will take you to higher levels, along with the right training, of course. Because let's face it, we all want to improve. And having a good balance between life painting and painting from references is good to have. Now I'm going to put some more planes on the neck, so this is not really going to be much about color, though I am thinking a lot about color. But right now I'm just trying to get a move on with the neck. Add these planes. There's a very distinct shape here. Now, one thing I should emphasize is that according to Henry Hinchey and all the way back to the Impressionists back in the day, each plane change should be a color change. So there's no such thing as it's the same color but only lighter or darker versions of it. For example, you're not going to get red and add white and black to it to paint an apple. You're going to see different, almost violets. You're going to see pink. You're going to see orange. You're going to see all kinds of different colors within that apple. Same thing goes with skin tones. So question, is it correct to paint from life but finish from the photo? You know, I wouldn't say that anything's right or wrong. It's just that some ways are easier to learn from than others. So painting from life it's easier to become a better painter when you're painting from life, at least as consistently as you possibly can. And yes, what you described is a good idea. If you're doing like a, you know, like a commission painting, and you're lucky enough that the client is going to pose for you, yes, I would say start it from life and finish it from the photo reference. But I would say finish it from the photo reference, but then do touch-ups from life with your client there if you're talking about commissions. That's what I wish I could do. But for me, you know, finding people that want me to paint their portraits in a commission setting are not really close enough to me where I can travel and paint them from life. What actually goes down with you know, famous portrait artists is that the client will pay for the expenses of the artist to travel. Either that or the artist applies the traveling fee to the cost of the commission, which is essentially the same thing, if you think about it. Okay, so I'm kind of moving very rapidly through the forms of the neck. I suggest you spend much more time on the neck. Now the neck muscle, the sternocleidomastoid, takes us towards the general vicinity of the suprasternal notch, which is here, and it's going to be indicated by another plane change. So this is why life painting is so important, because it's so complex. I mean, I can't imagine anything this complex. There's anatomy, there's perspective, there's color relationships, there's values. Oh, and then there's the aspect of likeness. There's so many things that make this just absolutely difficult. But I find that what makes it challenging is also what makes it fun. So more of a pinkish color. This is the loose interpretation, definitely in the wrong spot, but loose interpretation of the suprasternal notch. Then there's going to be a plane change over here, and then of course the hair conveniently covers that. So I'm going to just let that be. And in the beginning I make an absolute mess with the form, and then figure it out little by little. And you can kind of see my thought process on the palette. It's all over the place. Mixing color from intuition, also again trying to relate colors. So for example, the neck area was more of a bluish. As we move underneath of the clavicle, it's getting more of that like rosy pink, orangey color. I'm going to return to the neck. I'm going to use lead tin yellow. Along with whatever's already on the brush. Tiny bit of cadmium green. It's still not quite cool enough, so we're going to cool it off with Cerulean Blue. Right, now we're getting somewhere. And by the way, on the topic of color and color relationships, when you're studying color, when you're doing color studies, you can actually use titanium white. I usually don't use titanium white, but It's more useful for color studies for many reasons. One reason is it's cheaper, and when you do color study, you use a lot of paint because, for those of you that don't know, color study is basically when you paint a still life or any object using big shapes of color without any detail and just working with shapes for maybe like 2 hours at most. You go through a lot of paint that way. So titanium white is cheaper, so it's kind of better in that aspect. When it comes to portraiture, it's certainly not better, but with still life and landscape, definitely it's cheaper. Another thing is it raises the values much faster, and since you're working with big blocks of color, you don't really care for the mid-tone range. So once again, titanium would be the white color of choice to use in that instance. Another reason is that it's more flat, so it leans itself towards more of a flat looking painting, and color studies are supposed to look kind of flat, though you can make them look however you want. The best way to do a color study is to paint something simple in different light conditions. Paint the same thing multiple times, different light conditions. Think about Monet's haystacks. So this area I got a touch more pink. So down here we actually move towards the sternum. The sternum area actually tends to be warmer, more pinkish. So I kind of pushed that a tad bit. Now for the plane, this top plane here, for the suprasternal notch region of the clavicle, it's colder. It's definitely not as cold as the side of the neck. I'm mixing on that pile. I tend to reuse piles a lot. I'm gonna go with yellow ochre. Add a little bit of warmth to it. Get you to the close-up shot. That's a little towards the pink, but I'll take it. And you just get better and better at this the more you practice. Now, even the light side, for example, there's a light side on the clavicle here. It's pretty much the same value. It's facing the same direction. On the photo reference, they're almost the same exact color from here to there. But, of course, you can play around with the colors a little bit and change it towards another direction. I'm going to go towards more of the blue, keeping the same value range. A nice color to use is Cobalt Blue. Cobalt Blue is perfect in between blue. Just keep the color that's on the brush, leave it alone, change it a little bit, and you can have subtlety in your colors. The more subtlety that you have, that you balance, the more harmonious your color relationships are. And this is basically the crux of this entire live portrait painting tutorial. If you can watch and re-watch this entire segment when I painted the neck in relation to the background color, in relation to the shadow, That is the most important thing you're going to get out of watching this video. And it is definitely easy to miss color relationships because in most paintings, I guess we're more worried about likeness, we're more worried about how realistic the painting is, how detailed it is, things like that. All those kinds of thoughts are distractions from trying to paint color relationships. Alright, so let's move on to the hair that's supposed to overlap. And what I'm going to do is put the shadow tone of the hair first. And let's go to the palette, and I'm going to get a color for the shadow of the hair that's being casted onto here that is different from this, but similar. Different, but similar. The subtlety in the colors is only really obtainable. I shouldn't say only, but it's mostly obtainable through an extensive color palette. So if you have an extensive color palette, you are able to get colors that are close, very similar to one another, but different in a sense that you can have, say, for example, this is what we use for the shadow on the neck. This is what we're going to use for the cast shadow. So this is going to be similar in the sense that I'm going to use, say, burnt sienna and Viridian. However, I want to take it towards more of a warm level, maybe a kind of warm orangey yellow. So I'm going to go with Indian yellow. It's a very subtle change. And if I had a limited palette, I wouldn't have Indian yellow, and I would just have to stick with some kind of warm brown. And there's so many variations of warm brown. So for example, I can make this warm brown a little more red without going too brown if I go for a fiery reddish pink that doesn't lean too far to the orange. I can do that. I have a color that has those characteristics. That's Peryline Red. Subtle, and in fact it's probably so subtle that the camera won't pick it up. So let's see. Okay, so that will be for the shadow. Now you may notice that it is a lighter value than the shadow on the neck, so I kind of messed up by making it too light, but you can see that it is similar. It is similar to this shadow shape, but it is a different color. For example, if I had a limited palette, these two browns, they'd be the same because I'd have no way to differentiate between them. And just because I have an extended palette doesn't mean that everything is going to be orange in the light, purple in the shadow, blue in the middle tones, just basic looking painting like that. I'm not going to do that. Though I can start that way. So harmony, colors in relation to one another can be harmonious if you intentionally push the differences between them by not just observing it in nature and reproducing it, but a matter of feel, like almost like music. Hey Myrtle, could you achieve the same effect with acrylics? Oh man, you're all gonna hate me if I tell you what I truly think. I'm gonna tell you that my first thought is no, I don't think this is possible with acrylic, and I'm going to tell you why, and you're probably going to hate me, but trust me, I'm telling you this information on my own risk, at my own risk. So those of you that are watching and you enjoy what you're watching, back me up, please, because I'm going to get some hate for this. Number one, this is, say, puddle A, this is puddle B, and I want to relate puddle A and puddle B. I need to constantly adjust puddle A and puddle B in relation to one another. That mixture could have taken me 10 minutes, 8 or 10 minutes to create. Problem is, though you can use a stay wet palette and your mixtures stay wet the entire time, problem is when I go to the painting, I put this down, and suppose I put this down and it was not correct, and I wanted to relate it to this. That's my problem. It's going to dry there, and I'm going to have to layer into it, because with acrylics you have to layer, and that's the problem. I can't just go in with acrylics and go wet on wet and adjust it like I am here. It's not possible. Therefore, I don't think that it is possible to have the same effect with acrylics. However, I'm going to offer you a potential loophole, a way around that problem with acrylics, because I have worked with acrylics before, so I know there's ways to edit it. And that is, what you're going to want to do is have two different brushes with acrylics, and if you're editing this and you're editing this, have a brush for this, have a brush for this. In that 5-minute window that it takes for the acrylics to dry, you should be able to have enough time to achieve the desired effect. So that's a loophole. That's a way around it. Again, those of you that like these YouTube videos, back me up, because I'm probably going to get some negative feedback for my words there. Thoughts? I want to hear everyone's thoughts on this. I want some comments here in the live stream. Do you prefer to use acrylics or oil paint? Not just for portraiture, but for whatever subject matter you're painting. I want some feedback here. I want to know how many of you are acrylic painters, how many of you are oil painters, how many of you go back and forth. Hey Myrtle, no problem, no problem. Alright, so come on everyone, open invitation for you to comment here on this portrait painting tutorial video that's live. And I want to hear, do you use acrylic paint? Do you use oil paint? Do you have a balance between the two? What are your thoughts? Angela, oil paint? Sounds good. Someone here. I'm sorry, I can't read your name. You prefer oil paint? Canvas Dancer, oil paint. Edward Soto, oil paint. You agree with me? It's almost impossible to keep acrylic paints wet. So some areas over here are actually in between drying, so I used my medium to loosen it up. So I'm not going to mess with it since it's in between drying. And I will take the formal photograph of it once it's dry and everything is ready to be photographed. But perhaps next time we can do a half and half, like photography of this painting / starting a new painting. And of course this painting will be for sale once it's done. So comment from, let's see, Joella, you much prefer oils. You were a long-time user of acrylics but fell in love with oil paint, haven't went back. Thanks for your comments. Stephanie Thompson, you painted both but prefer oil painting. You find that you water your acrylics too much. Results are not as flattering. I see. Thanks for the comment. So Myrtle, you just really love acrylic. You've been using it for years. Love that it dries fast and you only need water. Well, remember there are alternatives. There's water mixable oil paints. And for more information on that, just simply ask. If you want some information on water mixable oil paints or alternatives to avoiding using solvent and toxic materials altogether, I can certainly help you out with that. Alright, let's make something up for the clothing. And I'm kind of lazy. I don't feel like getting a new brush out. So I'm just going to use this brush and mix over here. So the cast shadow, I don't really have much information on it in the photo reference, though I can look at my painting and reference that. It's pretty much just a dark blue, almost perfectly in the middle blue. Now remember, I'm painting a vignette, which will hopefully help to sell this painting. Vignettes are the areas that you leave unfinished to complement the more finished areas in a painting. If you can control your vignette look, you can create something that's very stylish and hopefully not too cliche. And I'm going to explain what is cliche about certain vignettes that work, but everyone does it. One thing that would be too cliche for me to do with this vignette would be to put a single brush stroke with, say, a flat brush or something here of the color of the clothing and just go like a single brush mark. That is way too cliche. So for example, let's go to the palette. I'm going to show you what I mean. You'll see some Alla Prima paintings by many people, including myself. I've done this before, where it's just I get the shape. I know you've seen me do this before, or maybe you haven't, I don't know, but making it just look like a single brush stroke, just leaving it. it looks cool, but the problem is it's overdone. It's done too much. So you always got to watch out for certain cliches. All right, so another comment. So from Myrtle, do you find that you get a similar effect with water-soluble oil paints? I've been hesitant to try them. Do they dry faster? Okay, so on your question about similar effects, the good news is, yes, I have noticed that certain brands of water-mixable oil paints have such a brilliant prismatic range that it's pretty much almost identical to working with traditional oil paints. But some differences, like for example, water mixable oil paints don't have lead white, but if you are doing color painting, it's not too big of a deal. If you're doing color studies, if you want to do more finished portraits, they do have the option of zinc white. You can mix some zinc white into your titanium white and get the same effect. They dry slower, but the manufacturers will say that they dry faster. Some people have told me that they do dry faster for them. So it's really, honestly, up to how you paint with them. I, for example, tend to use a lot of paint, so my paintings take a little bit longer to dry. But if you paint more thin, it might actually dry a little bit faster for you. But it's not too slow. It's slow, but it's not unbearably slow. For example, the worst I've found is a drying time of about 2 weeks. By dry, I mean like fully dry, like you can like almost scratch at it a little bit and nothing comes off. Touch dry, like this, is probably, yeah, see, this is touch dry. To get to this effect, it would take perhaps a week. For water mixables, for this, for traditional, it takes, especially because I'm using lead white, you have to understand, lead white dries much faster than titanium. It's not going to be a problem if it's the drying time that you're worried about. The color range is brilliant, and I'm gonna tell you which brand to get. And I don't want to sound too elitist, but I will say that I have tried. I've tried Winsor Newton Artisan water mixable oil paints. I have tried Holbein water mixable oil paints. What else have I tried? I tried another one, I just can't remember. But let's just say between Holbein, Winsor Newton, Grumbacher. I tried the Grumbacher. I think it's called Max. So Winsor Newton, Grumbacher, Holbein, and then there's this wonderful brand called Cobra. Cobra Talons is the name. So these are water mixable oil paints. Cobra Talons, and I buy these, or I bought these from Jerry's Artorama. They are, I'd say, probably the best in the industry for water mixable oil paints, according to most people and myself. So I'm gonna write that in the comments for you. Remember, I'm not sponsored by anyone, so alright, so I've typed it out for you. If anyone is on the fence about switching to oil paints and wanting to try the water mixable route first, try out Cobra. They have really brilliant colors, such as they have Phthalos, they have Cadmiums, they have a Viridian, they have a burnt Sienna, they have Madder Lake, which is close to Alizarin. So they have a pretty good range. And again, I'm not sponsored by them. I am not benefiting in any way, monetarily speaking, by giving you this information. So I'm going to use the thinness of the paint to scratch some light into this. Now, one thing that's really neat to do with a vignette is control the outside layer, or the outside, not layer, excuse me, the outside shape. So the areas that you leave just the tone of the canvas, you know, like I'm kind of liking this shape a little bit, though I do think I'm going to put a little more stuff over here, but I'm liking this little V shape here, and in contrast with the background. I find that to be appealing. There's a shadow over there. There's a bluish, I don't know what to describe it. I guess it's a collar on her shirt. Not blue, it's a pinkish. I still think I might have her neck too long, so before I go any further with that, maybe not. Her neck is just longer than I thought. Which is not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. I keep bringing up Sargent because he's Sargent, but Sargent would routinely kind of elongate necks because it aesthetically looks appealing. He would also elongate things like hands. Hey Myrtle. Oh good, I'm glad that's helpful for you. Yeah, I'm going to type another resource for you. If you are in the US, and everyone that's watching this as a pre-recorded video, I have enabled live chat replay, so if you're watching this as a pre-recorded video, you will see in the comments the information that I'm writing down. So your places to buy this is, if you're in the USA, go to Jerry's Artorama. Otherwise, go to Jackson's, and you'll get the best. You'll find the best deals on the brands that I'm talking about, and I mean like everything: the panels, the brushes, specifically the water mixable Cobra. Is hard to find. I think it's on Amazon. I'm not sure, but it's hard to find in art stores. So you can't just walk into your local Michael's and and find cobra talons. Alright, let's go to the palette, mix up that light blue. Let's go with Pthalo Turquoise. I always look for an excuse to use it. Pthalo Turquoise. Lots of lead white. Mixing it right on top of the skin tone on the palette. We'll dull it out just enough to use it. It may be too dark, so let's see. And this is again for the vignette effect. So let me fix that glare. And another thing that's really neat to put into a vignette is these little scratchy things, and you can only get it if you have a really light touch. So I'm just moving it really quickly. Whoops, you can't see it. Little light touches like this gives me kind of a scratchy look, but it's pretty neat. Another thing you could do is just thin the paint out to get an effect like that. Alright, so now I'm going to use the skin tone brush. I'm going to start to add that light color. I'm going to have to edit it a little bit. It's too thick on the photo reference. If I were to paint it the way I see it there, it's a little too unbalanced. So I'm going to have to make up my own here and try and balance it. So first thing is with the skin tone brush, I'm going to just gently adjust the continuation of it over here. This was compositionally the problem I had with the bigger painting that I did. More of that scratchiness. Gotta think about the vignette. And this is an example of how you don't have to force a style. Paint as you will, paint what you feel, and just naturally your own voice will show. Hey Paul, thanks for your comment. So you paint acrylics for portraits. Awesome. I would love to hear you know, what your materials and your preferences are with your acrylics. Do you use something to slow the drying time, or do you use a stay wet palette? Hey Myrtle. Oh good. I do believe Jackson should deliver to Paris, but don't quote me on that. I'm sure they do. Alright, so now paint these little blue spots. And I'm not even going to paint the little blue spiral. I just don't think it works with this. Okay, first, whoops, don't clean the brush in your medium. Bad choice, bad choice. Clean the brush with the solvent. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention. Mediums with water mixable oil paints. Cobalt Blue sells their own medium. They have a quick dry medium. That's the one I would suggest that you buy from Cobalt Blue. You can use it just like I'm using this to thin out the paints whenever you need to. Though I will say I've noticed that their quick drying medium is not really that quick drying, but it could just be because I used a lot of paint. I'm not sure. Here's another thing where the vignette matters. For example, someone that used the vignette very, very intelligently and it brought this artist great success was, once again, Mr. Sargent. I always will quote, not quote, sometimes I'll quote him, but I'll mention his name. John Singer Sargent. He is not the original person to make brush strokes look cool. That was Titian way, way back, hundreds of years before him, and after him, Velázquez, Diego Velázquez. Sargent even did his own studies of Diego Velázquez paintings. But nonetheless, this is something you need to think about. The way that little fun things like that, the way that the paint looks in your vignette area. And guess what? Forget the darn reference. Like, as long as it works in the painting, you know, for example, if I want to, I can just go like this and just smack the reference out of there. Of course, my timing was completely off. But we are going to go ahead and put the reference back over there because you want to have the reference to look at, I'm sure. But that is it. I mean, that is the effect that I wanted to get for the vignette. You can still see in the close-up some of the preliminary lines there. You can see some of the preliminary lines up here. Oh, well, hold on. You can see them up here, and you can see them back there. So I don't know about you, but I really like paintings where I can see through different layers. So for example, like this is the layer with all the subtlety on it, but I can still see, like right there, if you look closely there, there's some coolness. That's the tone of the panel, and this is still the first layer here of the color. The second and third layers are all over here, over here, and over here. That's an effect that I really do enjoy in oil paintings. And if you're in the oil painting business and you want to sell paintings like I do and do commissions and stuff, it's important to know kind of like the fashion, so to speak, with these materials. Hey Paul, you use a Stay Wet palette? Yep, those are pretty much required for acrylics to keep the paint wet. Awesome, I'm glad that you're using that. So I am left with 29 minutes still to go, and I think the painting is probably good enough to leave, but I think what I'm going to do is go back into the background color and just change it, just tweak it a little bit. I think it might be a little too saturated, although I like the brightness of it. I'm going to change it, and while I do that, I'm going to adjust all of the edges in the silhouette. And I'm just going to mix right in the middle here. One thing you can do is just mix into your old puddles like this. And that's a nice way to get a very odd looking color. In painting, odd looking colors tend to be the most beautiful ones. So that's kind of what I want. And I did say that I was going to adjust the edge for the hair. So I'm just mixing up something to paint along the edge of the hair. To have the most control over your edges, you want to paint wet into wet. But this is a little more challenging because I have to kind of match the color for the hair. And again, this is only alongside the edge. Whoops, that's not good. The bristle from my brush. And it's not that much darker. I think what I'm going to do is actually put a fade, maybe darken some areas up here, or maybe a little bit lower. Hey Angela. Oh good, I'm glad that you like to see the vignette. Oh, another thing to mention, Angela and other online students, those of you taking my online classes on Patreon, remember that next week is going to be the first week of April. And remember that the first Thursday of the month, I always do a live chat using Zoom. So if you want to hang out with me on Zoom, you're welcome to do so. If you're in the online classes, of course. Alright, so this is more of a dark, less saturated violet. So once again, I'm thinking about the edges, but I'm also thinking about the vignette. I don't want everything to be covered. Especially this edge here. Remember, some edges need to be sharp, others need to get soft. So that's going to be my sharp one. This is going to be my soft one. Angela, yeah, it would be great to see you on Zoom. Let's adjust this edge. So you can leave the brush strokes to show in the background too. Now this edge is going to be sharp. This edge is going to be somewhat softer, still relatively sharp. And you can still see some of the preliminary raw umber showing through there. Let the brush strokes show strategically. Angela, yep, take all the time you need with your paintings. Always remember that when you're painting or drawing or any kind of art form, remind yourself you have more time than you think. If you remind yourself that you have more time than you think, you tend to be more relaxed when you're painting. The more relaxed you are when you're painting, the less stressed you will be. The less stressed you are when you're painting, I would say the more subtlety you can get in your paintings, which is ultimately what we want. We want to be able to paint subtlety. Now this edge is going to be nearly lost. Almost a lost edge. And I got paint on my fan brush. So when you're holding your brushes, a little word to the wise, don't hold your brushes together like I do. So I'm going to have to just clean this off. And I just dry clean it. I don't use solvent. By dry cleaning, I mean I just rub it up against the dry paper towel. Like so. Marley, you want to be an artist when you get older? You can be an artist no matter what your age. All you have to do is have an interest in art and start creating, start learning. Oh, you want me to say hi? Yeah. M-A-R-Z. Hi, Mars. If anyone remembers some of the history of Diego Velázquez, some of his teenage year paintings still exist. So there's some paintings that he did when he was 14 or 15, I don't remember exactly how old he was, but he was a teenager and he was already doing some great things. And you can actually see his progression too from when he was younger. So there's the vignette. Oh, Stephanie Thompson, thank you so much for the super chat. You know what? You should email me. I can totally send you some samples from the online classes. Or better yet, if you're on Instagram, maybe you can contact me on Instagram. I totally should send you some sample lessons. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie Thompson, for your super chat. We are going to bring the super chat Grumpy Cat once again, and we're going to bring him with the fan brush. So not just a portrait painting tutorial, but this is also a live stream. Remember, everyone, these demonstrations are being done live, and again, I'm very, very thankful to viewers such as Stephanie Thompson that go the extra mile and help creators like me out with super chats. So thank you so much, Stephanie Thompson. So super chat Grumpy Cat is here with the fan brush, saying thank you so much. If you want, we can go and we can make Grumpy Cat do a little fan brush, some fan brush action here, and adjust some of the edges. So Grumpy Cat is painting a little bit for you. So thank you so much. Remember, this is my super chat Grumpy Cat that I use every time I get a super chat. So once again, every camera angle. Super Chat Grumpy Cat says, thank you, Stephanie Thompson. And Super Chat Grumpy Cat over here by the palette says, thank you, Stephanie Thompson. Well, thank you so much for the Super Chat. It really does help me out so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So I think, you know what, I think this painting is kind of complete. So I'm going to go ahead and sign it. So remember that a painting is complete when you say it is. There is a point in a painting where you kind of get a certain feeling and you know that you've said everything that you wanted to say in your painting. Now clearly, if I want to, I can go and render everything even more. But I don't want to. I want some things to be left alone, like the ears in its first color layer. You can still see some of the preliminary lines here. You can still see the under or the raw umber there. So I like being able to see that progression in paintings, especially as a demonstration. So yeah, once again, thank you so much, Stephanie Thompson. Let's go ahead and get a Sable brush. And you know what? Maybe I'm going to have a little conversation on materials for the last, what is it, like 13 minutes that we have here. So I'm going to sign the painting, and I'm going to talk with you a little bit about my materials. For many of you, this is just going to be a recap, but I'm sure that you will enjoy it nonetheless. Well, at least I hope. So let's go to the palette. I've got my Sable brush out, and we are going to, let's just use this dark color to sign it. And I'm using a size, what is this, size 5 round. How about we sign it the bottom right corner. Hopefully someone watching this video will be interested in owning this painting. My hopes is that someone out there in the world will be interested in this painting. So how do you spell my name? Y-U-P-A-R-I. The year is 2022. And you have to thin your paint out so so it can make a mark, kind of like almost like a Sharpie. So but still with the brush, you know, the brush marks. So there's your close-up, and there is what the painting looks like. I'm gonna rotate this so you see it with less distortion, but more glare, unfortunately. But that's just the way it is. Get the reference out of there because we don't need it. The glare is a little too strong, so right there. That's good enough. Oh, thanks, Stephanie. I'm glad you like Super Chat Grumpy Cat. Hey Paul, you're painting a lake and trees with acrylic. Sounds very awesome. Alright. So let's have a little discussion on my materials while we still have 10 minutes left on the live stream. And of course, this is a reminder that this demonstration is now complete. It is a 12x16 original oil painting by me, created entirely in my featured on my YouTube channel, so every brushstroke has been shown. So this will be available for sale on my Etsy. Of course, the price is going to be adjusted for the amount of time it took to paint it and the size that it is when that comes into shipping costs and everything. So just a little reminder about that. So let's talk about materials. First thing I'm going to talk about are the brands that I like to use. The brands of oil colors in particular. So I like to use, let's go to the palette. I'm going to, instead of naming the colors, because the colors are listed in the description box for you already, I'm going to mention the brands. So my lead white is Michael Harding. My yellow ochre is Rublev, though I interchange Rublev with Winsor Newton. So Rublev Blue Ridge Yellow Ochre, I can interchange it with Winsor Newton Yellow Ochre Pale. So you have Michael Harding, Rublev. My cadmiums, such as cadmium orange and cadmium yellow pale and cadmium green, are Gamblin or Winsor Newton. Winsor Newton or Gamblin work perfectly fine for cadmiums. My cadmium red deep, however, is Old Holland brand. However, since it is a cadmium, you can use any Winsor Newton or Gamblin. I just bought the Old Holland because I wanted to try it out. Phthalo Turquoise is a Winsor Newton color. This is my favorite blue to use. I also use Williamsburg colors for lead white, though I don't have it here. And that should be it with the brands. So remember, Winsor Newton, Gamblin, Rublev, and Michael Harding are, for the majority of the colors, if not all of them, what I use. So thank you for your comment, Angela and Jack. All right, so that is the materials in terms of the brands that I like. Another thing that I may not talk a lot about is my spike lavender and why I use it. Spike lavender and cold press linseed oil. So they are mixed in there. I'm going to show you the spike lavender, which lasts a long time for me because I don't use it very, I don't use a ton of it, but this is my spike lavender. Many of you may have already seen it, but this is from Chelsea Classical Studio brand. Don't worry about the brand. It's just spike lavender oil. The nice thing about it is it has a very rich history with oil painting. It's been around just as long as turpentine has, so it's been around a long time. It's known to have a very good relationship with oil paint, and that's the most relevant reason for me to use it. Another reason would be is that it is non-toxic for the air, so I don't really need to expose myself to odorless mineral spirits if I don't need to. Now let's get to the odorless mineral spirits. I use Gamsol. I only use Gamsol. I don't use any other brand for odorless mineral spirits, and that is just because I'm used to it. Gamsol. Don't worry, the lid is closed. Gamsol is, I guess, the most famous odorless mineral spirits that you can use, known for its safety. Though, don't trust the lid. This is something I don't like about Gamsol, and pretty much everything else, to be honest. Don't trust the lid, so never leave it like this, because this will leak out of there. So that's my odorless mineral spirits. Let's get into brushes and why I like to use the brushes that I use. So for the most part, I like to use Silber Brush brand, Silber Brush Grand Prix. Most of my brushes are currently in a plastic bag and in a freezer, so that prevents them from drying while they're not in use if I'm too lazy to clean them. But you can see some of the brushes are over here. So Silber Brush Grand Prix, I like to use them because I like to use bristle brushes that last a long time, that can pick up a lot of paint and are relatively soft. They're not as stiff as some other brands. So that's why I like to use Brush Grand Prix. Also for my Sables, I like to use Silverbrush brand also. No, I'm not sponsored by them. I wish I was, but I'm not. For my Sables, I use Brush Grand Prix Pure Red Sable. Sometimes I'll use a round, other times I'll use a cat's tongue, which is not made from cat's tongues, it's just the shape of it. And I like to use size 2 rounds, as you've seen for the majority of this painting, and size 4 extra long filberts. Size 2 filberts, excuse me, they're filberts. Extra long or the regular size. For my painting support, for the surfaces that I work on, I pretty much only like to use either panels or oil primed linen. So an example of an oil primed linen versus a panel, let me see if I can find a small one to show you. Okay, so here's an unfinished oil primed linen painting. This is unfinished. You can see the back. This is linen. You can see that I stretched it. I like to stretch my own oil primed linen canvases. What I do is I tear the cotton off of old cotton canvases and reuse the stretchers. This is an example of a painting on a panel. This is a sketch, so it's really unfinished looking, but this is on a panel. This is an ampersand panel, and this was a study for a painting that I'm currently working on from life. So I either work on panel or oil prime linen for long-term projects. If I am doing a study, a color study, or a figure study, like a really quick figure study. For example, I do teach figure painting in my online classes. So for the majority of them, I use panel for the studies. So these are examples. Obviously they're censored. I censored them myself. So this is on a MDF panel. So if you have MDF panels, you can gesso them, as you see here, with just acrylic gesso, and just paint right onto them and do your studies. So this was a figure demonstration. This was another figure demonstration. I teach figure painting on Wednesdays in my online classes. I will use cotton on sketches for figure sometimes, and so this one is a demonstration from, don't worry, it's censored, there's nothing to worry about there, but this was on Wednesday. So I was explaining the usage of a warm imprimatura, or just say warm tone on the canvas versus a cool underpainting. And I was also explaining more about form. So here you have a little loose interpretation of the rib cage, but you have the sternum here along with the xiphoid process and the suprasternal notch. I was explaining a little bit about curvature of form, and then more of the form curving in and out of that. That was one that we worked on for 2 sittings instead of the regular 1 sitting, but that is done on a cotton canvas. Other materials are my easel. What I like to use for my easels, I use whatever, but I really like the, what are they called again? The French easels. So this is a Julian French easel, which is actually on a table. So I use it on a table, or I'll use it in its regular setup. But you may have noticed this easel in my YouTube channel ever since the beginning. I've had this palette, or this excuse me, this easel since the very beginning. Last thing I'll talk about materials wise that I like to use is my palette. So this is a handmade palette by a palette maker named Larry Wiseman, who lives in Pennsylvania, the border between Maryland and Pennsylvania. He's like maybe 5 miles away from Maryland. He's like really close to Maryland. So I drove to him and hand selected this palette for myself, and it is my favorite ever. I only use this palette. It's 12 by 16 inches, so it fits perfectly in a 12 by 16 inch palette box to preserve the paints on the edge here. And it is completely handmade. It cannot be bought anywhere online. Larry Wiseman has been making palettes for, I believe, 40 something years. He's now in his 80s and continues to make palettes. He does not use the internet, so you pretty much just have to call him and drive to him to obtain one of his palettes. So very, very special palette to me, so that's why I use it. So that should be it. This painting is completed, and that is the end of today's stream. Next time we will start another painting. So this is the point where I ask if there are any last minute questions. So I'm going to hang out for just a couple minutes. So just waiting on any last minute questions. Putting my brushes in a bag. I'm going to tie them up with a hair tie and call it a day. Well, thank you for watching, Myrtle, and thanks again, Stephanie Thompson, for the super chat. Your support really helps me out on my YouTube channel. Tipu, good question. What will I be painting on Tuesday? That is the eternal question. What will I paint next? To be honest, I have no clue. I kind of want to do another portrait, but I know I should do another still life. So I'm not sure at the moment. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure. So just waiting to see if there's any last minute questions, any more last minute questions. Okay, so other than the question of what will I paint next Tuesday, which I'm not entirely sure yet, doesn't look like there are any last minute questions, I don't think. Yep, no problem, Tipu. Thank you so much for watching. So once again, thank you all so much for watching. Remember that I am doing these public painting sessions on YouTube every Tuesday and Thursday, somewhere around between 7:15 p.m. and 9 p.m. Maryland, USA time. I used to say Eastern Standard Time, but that changed. So all I'm going to say is Maryland, USA time. So between 7:15 to 9 p.m. Maryland, USA time. So whatever time it is on the east coast of the USA, 7:15, whatever time that is for you, is the time that I will be on YouTube. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. Remember, if you are interested in taking your online education with me further, remember I have links to my online classes in the description box of the video, also pinned as the top comment in the live chat. So again, thank you so much for watching. I wish you all the very best in all of your artwork, and I will see you on the next one.